Hey, everybody, and welcome. Today, we are diving into a huge story, one that stretches over 250 years and pretty much explains how our world works today. Especially if you're gearing up for the AP Human Geography exam, think of this as your guide to Unit 7, covering everything from the very first factories to the global challenges we're facing right now.
Everything really boils down to this one question. I know it seems simple, but the answer is this incredible saga of invention, inequality, and connection. See, that single piece of tech, it didn't just power machines. It powered a complete reinvention of human society. It literally drew the map of wealth and poverty that we still see all around us.
All right, so let's jump right in at the beginning. Chapter 1, The Rise of Industry. This is kind of the Big Bang moment, The birth of the modern economy as we know it. The Industrial Revolution.
What's so fascinating is that it all kicked off in one place, Great Britain. So why there? Well, it was like a perfect storm of factors. They had tons of coal and iron, a lot of capital coming in from their colonies, and a pretty stable government. Inventions like the spinning jenny and, of course, the steam engine made mass production possible on a scale no one had ever seen. From there, the model just spread like wildfire to Europe and North America, creating this powerful core of industrial nations. And all this new industrial power created a new hunger, a desperate need for raw materials and new markets, which directly fueled a second huge wave of imperialism.
As economies industrialize, they also change their shape. Think of it like leveling up in a video game. A country's economy usually moves through these 5 sectors. You start at the primary sector. That's all about pulling stuff out of the ground, right? Farming, mining, fishing. Then you level up to the secondary sector, where you manufacture all that raw stuff into goods. As the country develops even more, its economy shifts to the tertiary sector, which is all about services. We're talking teachers, lawyers, baristas. And at the very top, you've got the quaternary sector, focusing on knowledge and tech. And the super small but powerful quinary sector. That's your top-level decision makers like CEOs and presidents. Okay, so imagine you're a factory owner back in the 19th century. Where do you build your factory? Well, a guy named Alfred Weber came up with a theory for that. The main idea is super simple. You build it where it costs the least amount of money. You've got to balance 3 key things: the cost of shipping your materials and your finished goods, how much you have to pay your workers, and the benefits of what he called agglomeration, which is really just a fancy word for clustering. Think about how car companies all bunched up in Detroit or tech companies in Silicon Valley. When they're all together, they can share infrastructure and a pool of talented workers, and that saves everybody money. It's just a constant puzzle to solve for the most profit. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 2 and see how this all builds. Because industrialization didn't just create a ton of wealth. It also created massive worldwide inequality. So the big questions are, how do we even measure development, or the lack of it? And what are the big theories trying to explain why the world is split between the haves and the have-nots?
First things first, development is so much more than just money. Yeah, we often look at gross national income, or GNI, basically all the money a country's people and businesses make. But a way better tool is the Human Development Index, or HDI. This gives you a much fuller picture. It combines a country's standard of living with its people's health, which is measured by life expectancy, and their education, measured by how many years they go to school. The idea is that a truly developed country gives its people the ability to live long, healthy, and knowledgeable lives.
And when you use a measure like HDI, a really clear pattern just pops out. You can basically divide the world into 3 tiers. You've got the core nations, think the US and Western Europe, who industrialized first and have high HDI and GNI. Then you have the periphery nations, which were often former colonies, and they have low levels of both. And right there in the middle, you have the semi-periphery, countries like Mexico, India, and China that are industrializing right now and have a mix of characteristics from both sides. So why is there this division? Well, one of the classic theories, and you absolutely need to know this for the exam, is Rostow's stages of economic growth. It's a really optimistic, straight-line model that basically says every single country is on the same path, they're just at different spots along the way. You start out as a traditional farming society, and then, with some investment and industrialization, you eventually hit the final stage, an age of high mass consumption, where the service industry is king. But what if that's not the whole story? Dependency theory comes in with a much more critical take. It argues that the system isn't a ladder that everyone can climb, but a rigid structure that's actually designed to keep the periphery dependent on the core. The powerful idea here is that the poverty of some countries isn't some accident or a temporary delay. It's the direct result of being exploited by wealthier nations. It's a relationship some people even call neo-colonialism. Okay, so for the exam, you have to know the difference between these. This slide breaks it down perfectly.
Rostow sees development as something that happens inside a country. Anything's inequality is just temporary. Dependency theory sees it as a power struggle, where inequality is built into the system on purpose. And a third one, Wallerstein's world systems theory, kind of blends them. It argues that a country's role, whether it's core, semi-periphery, or periphery, was basically locked in by when it industrialized, and that role is really, really hard to change.
This all brings us to Chapter 3, the globalized economy. Because in the 20th and 21st centuries, that original industrial model got completely flipped upside down. It created the deeply connected and, let's be honest, often chaotic world that we're all living in today. The huge shift was from what we call Fordism to post-Fordism. Fordism was that classic model, massive production on a single assembly line, all happening in one country. Post-Fordism is our reality today. Production is flexible, it's specialized, and it's spread out all over the globe. Think about your phone. It was probably designed in California, its parts were made in like a dozen different countries, and then it was all put together in China. This is only possible because of things like just-in-time delivery, which means companies don't need to keep massive warehouses full of parts.
So what happened in those original core countries because of the shift? Deindustrialization. As companies went looking for cheaper and cheaper labor, the old manufacturing centers of the US and Europe started to empty out. This created what's known as the Rust Belt, whole regions filled with these abandoned, rusted-out factories that used to be the beating heart of the economy.
So where did all those jobs go? Well, they were outsourced to the semi-periphery, which led to the rise of newly industrialized countries, or NICs. Companies moved their factory jobs to places like China, Mexico, and India to get lower labor costs and fewer regulations. This completely changed the global division of labor.
Now, to attract these big foreign companies, a lot of developing countries set up what are called specialized economic zones. An SEZ is basically an area where the normal business laws and taxes don't apply, all to lure in foreign investment. An export processing zone, or EPZ, is a specific type of SEZ that's just for making stuff to sell to other countries. And a free trade zone is a tax-free area just for storing and shipping goods. The key thing to remember is that these are all tools that countries use to try and plug themselves into the global supply chain. So finally, this whole 250-year story of growth and change has led us to our single greatest modern challenge. Chapter 4, Sustainability and the Future. How do we keep our economies growing without completely wrecking the planet that we all depend on? Let's just start with one single stark number. Since those first steam engines started pumping carbon into the atmosphere, the average global temperature has gone up by 1.1 degrees Celsius. That one data point represents the immense environmental cost of our industrial and economic model. It's the urgent problem that all future development now has to deal with. The proposed solution to this problem is a concept called sustainable development, and it's really a delicate balancing act. The goal is to hit all three of these pillars at the same time. Keep economic growth going so people can have good lives, make sure there's social equity so that growth is shared fairly, and protect the environment so that future generations can do the same. And it's incredibly difficult because a lot of the time these three goals are actually in conflict with each other. So how do we even try to achieve this balance? Well, there are a few key strategies that are in play. Ecotourism, for example, tries to make protecting nature profitable for local communities. The United Nations has laid out 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which are like a global blueprint to tackle everything from poverty to clean energy. And of course, there's the massive global push to switch our energy systems from fossil fuels to renewables. So as we wrap up this massive unit, what are the big takeaways? First, the Industrial Revolution totally reshaped our world, both geographically and socially. Second, that development has been incredibly uneven, and we have competing theories to explain why. Third, our modern world is defined by this deep economic interdependence, all thanks to global trade. And finally, sustainability is now the central challenge for our shared future.
And I'll leave you with this question to chew on. As we face new challenges like climate change and pandemics, which of those theories, Rostow's optimism, dependency theory's critique, or world systems theory's rigid structure, do you think best helps us understand the path forward for our incredibly interconnected world? And one last very practical note for all you AP students out there. Do not sleep on this unit. It makes up a huge chunk of your exam score, somewhere between 12 and 17%. Make sure you know your development theories inside and out, that you can explain Weber's location model, and that you can clearly connect global trade to our modern economic structure. Thanks for watching. Good luck with your studies.